I didn't show up by accident. I showed up because the quiet things had been getting louder, and when you're a mother, you learn to listen to the sounds that don't belong. Let me tell you who I am first, because context matters when you're about to hear what I did. I'm Elaine Harper, 62 years old, retired high school librarian with a pension that covers the mortgage and a spine that's gotten stronger with age, not weaker. I raised Lily alone after her father walked out when she was 12. 26 years of justice too, learning to trust our instincts and lean on each other. Lily grew up smart, careful, independent, the kind of daughter who calls every Sunday and remembers your birthday without Facebook reminders. She met Connor Whitaker 3 years ago at a corporate training seminar in Portland. He was charming in that clean-cut, ambitious way. MBA from a decent school, steady job in logistics, the kind of man who opens doors and remembers anniversary dates. Lily was 28, working as a dental assistant, living in her own one-bedroom apartment that she'd painted sage green and filled with plants. She'd dated before, but Connor was different. He pursued her with flowers and weekend getaways, talked about wanting a family, painted pictures of a future that looked like magazine spreads. They married last spring in a small ceremony at the Botanical Garden, and by summer, she was pregnant with their first child. I liked Connor well enough in the beginning. He was polite to me, respectful, seemed to adore Lily. But there were small things. The way he'd order for her at restaurants without asking what she wanted. How he'd suggest she didn't need to work once the baby came, even though she loved her job. Little controlling gestures dressed up as care. I kept my mouth shut because Lily seemed happy, and sometimes mothers see problems where there are none. But then came the flood. Back in late October, a flood rewired our plans. On October 28th, a main riser burst above my daughter Lily's unit. The ceiling caved, water bled through the nursery walls, and the city slapped an uninhabitable notice on her door. No one back inside until dry out, demolition and mold and asbestos clearance to rebuild, followed later by final inspection for occupancy. You know how these things go. The landlord's insurer approved remediation, but it meant gutting drywall, running industrial fans for 10 days, and environmental testing. The contractor was backlogged through the holidays, so the earliest rebuild date was January 5th. Translation: you can't live there until the city clears it. Simple bureaucracy, but it might as well have been a death sentence for what it unleashed. Insurance offered a standard hotel room, no kitchenette. Connor said, "No kitchen isn't safe for a pregnant woman. I offer my spare room immediately. I have a 2-bedroom house with good heating and a kitchen stocked with everything Lily might need during her pregnancy." But Connor smiled that smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes and insisted they'd stay with his parents, Karen and Richard Whitaker, for 2 weeks. The Whitakers live in a sprawling colonial in the suburbs, the kind of house that screams respectability and old money, though I suspect most of it is credit and appearances. Karen Whitaker is one of those women who volunteers at charity galas and expects gratitude for her generosity. Richard owns a small insurance agency, the type of man who believes his opinion is fact and his house rules are law. They'd raised Connor to be their golden child, the son who could do no wrong, the boy who deserved everything handed to him. 2 weeks. I should have known better. 2 weeks became 8. The changes started immediately, but so subtly I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. Lily's calls started coming from Connor's phone. She left hers charging upstairs, he'd explain. Her car keys began going missing. Karen would drive her to appointments, to the grocery store, anywhere she needed to go. The thermostat stayed at 65 to save money, though the Whitakers' heating bill was hardly a concern. When I visited, which became less and less welcome, Karen answered questions meant for my daughter. When I left, I started collecting paperwork. When a mother's stomach won't unclench, she investigates. The first time I noticed something was truly wrong was mid-November. I called Lily's cell and Connor answered. "She's resting," he said. The pregnancy's making her tired. I'll tell her you called. But there was something in his voice, something territorial. Like he was guarding a prize instead of caring for a wife. I hung up with that familiar knot in my stomach, the same one I'd had when Lily was 16 and started dating a boy who made her laugh less and apologize more. The second red flag came during my first visit to the Whitaker house. I brought soup, homemade chicken and dumplings, Lily's favorite when she's not feeling well. Karen answered the door wearing a silk blouse and diamond earrings at 2 in the afternoon, as if she'd dressed for an audience. "Elaine," she said, not moving aside to let me in. "How thoughtful. I'll make sure Lily gets this." "I'd like to see her," I said, keeping my voice pleasant but firm.
"She's napping."
The baby's been keeping her up at night. Through the doorway, I could see into their living room. Pristine white furniture, crystal decanters, magazines fanned across a coffee table like a doctor's office. Everything perfect and cold. I listened for sounds of life upstairs, for Lily's voice, for anything that confirmed she was actually there and actually resting. "When she wakes up, tell her I stopped by," I said, handing over the soup. "And tell her to call me from her own phone." Karen's smile tightened. Of course. But Lily didn't call that day or the next. When I finally heard from her 3 days later, it was through Connor's phone again, and she sounded strange. Tired, yes, but also careful, like she was choosing each word to avoid stepping on a landmine. "Mom," she said, "I'm fine. Really. Just tired." "How's the baby?"
"Good. Growing."
"The doctor says everything's on track." "Which doctor?" "I thought Dr. Martinez was handling your pregnancy." A pause. Too long. We switched to someone closer to the house. More convenient. I wrote that down. Lily loved Dr. Martinez, had been seeing her for 2 years. Switching doctors midway through a pregnancy, without mentioning it to me? That wasn't like her. "When can I see you?" I asked. Another pause.
"Soon."
"We're just settling in. Getting used to the routine here." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea that went cold while I thought. Lily had lived independently for 10 years. She'd traveled solo through Europe after college, negotiated her own lease agreements, handled her own finances. The idea that she needed time to settle into someone else's routine felt wrong. I started keeping a journal. Nothing dramatic, just observations. Date, time, who I spoke to, what was said. Little things that might add up to something bigger. November 15th. Called Lily's phone. Connor answered. Says she's at appointment, but can't remember which doctor. November 18th. Visited house. Karen says Lily is resting. Won't let me go upstairs. House thermostat set to 65 degrees. November in Oregon. November 22nd. Lily calls from Connor's phone. Sounds tired. Says she can't make Thanksgiving at my house because it's easier to stay put. When I offer to bring dinner there, she says Karen's already planning something. Thanksgiving was the breaking point. I'd hosted Lily for every Thanksgiving since she was 12. It was our tradition, just us, cooking together, watching old movies afterward. The idea that she'd skip it without even asking if I wanted to join them at the Whitakers felt like a slap. I showed up anyway. Not to make trouble, just to see my daughter and bring her favorite cranberry sauce recipe that we'd made together every year. Richard answered the door. He's a big man, the kind who uses his size to intimidate without thinking about it. Elaine, he said, not moving aside. We weren't expecting you. I brought cranberry sauce for Lily. Our family recipe. That's thoughtful, but Karen's got everything handled. I'd like to see Lily. He glanced back into the house, and I heard Karen's voice. Who is it, Richard? Lily's mother, he called back. Tell her we're just sitting down to dinner. I looked past Richard into their dining room. The table was set for 4. Connor, Karen, Richard, and Lily. 4 chairs for place settings. No room for me. No invitation offered. Maybe I could join you, I said. I brought wine, too. Richard's face hardened. Family dinner, Elaine. I'm sure you understand. But I could see Lily through the archway, sitting at the far end of the table in a sweater that looked too big for her, picking at her food while the others talked around her. She looked up once and saw me in the doorway, and the expression on her face broke my heart. Relief and fear mixed together, like she wanted to run to me, but didn't dare. I waved. She raised her hand slightly, then looked down at her plate when Connor said something I couldn't hear. Tell her I love her, I said to Richard. And tell her the cranberry sauce is in the refrigerator when she wants it. I left the dish and drove home to eat leftover pizza alone, but the image of Lily sitting at that table, isolated at her own family dinner, stayed with me. I started researching. Not legal research, not yet, but practical information. How long do insurance repairs typically take? What are the tenant rights during uninhabitable periods? How do temporary living arrangements work? I also started learning about something I'd never had to understand before: coercive control. I'd heard the phrase in news stories, but I'd never looked up what it actually meant. What I found made my hands shake. Isolation from family and friends.
Check.
Control of communication devices.
Check.
Restriction of movement and transportation.
Check.
Financial control. Maybe. I didn't know enough about their money situation yet. Control of medical care and appointments.
Possibly.
I called the domestic violence hotline, not because I was ready to report anything, but because I needed to understand what I was seeing. The woman who answered was patient and knowledgeable. She didn't push me to take action I wasn't ready for, but she gave me information that crystallized my fears. Pregnancy is often when coercive control escalates, she said. The abuser sees the pregnancy as further binding the victim to them, and they use the victim's vulnerability and concern for the baby as leverage. What should I do if I suspect this is happening to someone I love? Document everything. Keep records. If the person is willing, help them establish a safety plan. But understand that the most dangerous time for someone in an abusive relationship is often when they try to leave. I hung up with a new sense of urgency and a clear mission. I needed more information, and I needed to be smart about how I gathered it. I hired a private investigator, not to spy on my daughter, but to understand what was happening in that house that I couldn't see. The PI was a former police officer named Janet Mills, a woman about my age who specialized in domestic investigations. She was expensive, but I had savings and a clear conscience about how to spend them. What exactly are you looking for? Janet asked during our first meeting. I need to know if my daughter is safe. I need to know if she's there by choice or if she's being held there. Janet nodded. I can do surveillance, but I can't trespass or break any laws. I can watch comings and goings, note patterns, see who drives where and when. Would that help? It would. Within a week, Janet had a clear picture. Lily rarely left the house. When she did, it was always with Karen or Connor, never alone. Her car, the Honda Civic she'd bought herself and loved, sat in the driveway and used. When Connor left for work each morning, Richard often stayed home. When both men were gone, Karen remained. Your daughter is under constant supervision, Janet reported. I've watched for 5 days and haven't seen her leave the property alone once. I asked Janet to keep watching while I made my next move. I called Lily's old doctor. Dr. Martinez remembered me from accompanying Lily to appointments over the years. I explained the situation carefully. My pregnant daughter was temporarily living with her in-laws, had switched doctors, and I was concerned about the continuity of her care. I can't give you specific medical information, Dr. Martinez said, but I can tell you that Lily hasn't been in to see me since early October. She missed her last 2 scheduled appointments without calling. That was completely unlike Lily. She was religious about medical appointments, especially during pregnancy. Missing appointments without calling meant either something was wrong or someone wasn't letting her make those calls. The pieces were forming a picture I didn't want to see, but couldn't ignore. I decided to make another visit to the Whitaker house, this time unannounced and at a different time of day. If I was right about the level of control, there should be patterns I could disrupt. I chose a Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Connor would be at work, Richard would likely be at his office, and maybe, I could see Lily when Karen was her only guard instead of her whole family. Karen answered the door in a bathrobe, which told me she hadn't been expecting company. "Elaine," she said, looking annoyed. "This is very early." "It's 10 o'clock," I replied. "I brought some things for Lily. Prenatal vitamins, some books I thought she'd enjoy. I can take them to her. I'd rather give them to her myself." "Is she awake?" Karen's jaw tightened. "She's not feeling well today. Morning sickness." At 10 a.m.? That's unusual for second trimester. I pushed gently past Karen into the foyer. The house was silent, but not empty silent. Someone is here but hiding silent. "Lily." I called up the stairs. "Honey, it's Mom." No answer. But then, faintly, I heard movement upstairs. A door closing. Footsteps. "She's sleeping," Karen said firmly. "You should call first next time." I nodded and left, but now I knew. Lily was there. She could hear me, but she wasn't responding. Either she couldn't respond or she was too afraid to respond. That evening, I called the domestic violence advocate again. This time, I was ready to learn about protective orders and safety planning. "The most important thing," she said, "is that your daughter has to want help. We can't force someone to leave an abusive situation, and trying to force it often makes things worse." "How do I know if she wants help if I can't talk to her alone?" "That's the challenge. Can you create an opportunity for private communication?" I thought about it. Lily's old job, her friends from work, her regular haunts. Connor had effectively cut her off from all of them. But there was one person who might be able to help. Nora Price. I remembered Lily mentioning her in November, the neighbor across from the Whitakers who had helped her with groceries and given her a phone number in case anything happens. Lily had shared my number with Nora. In case anything happens. I'd saved Nora under favorites, but I'd never called her. It was time. Nora answered on the second ring. "Hello." "Hi, this is Elaine Harper, Lily's mother. She gave you my number a few weeks ago." "Oh yes, Elaine. Lily talks about you all the time. How are you?" "I'm worried about her. I was wondering if we could talk." There was a pause. "I've been worried too. Can you come by?" "I live at 1847 Maple Street, directly across from the Whitakers." I drove over that afternoon. Nora Price was about 70, a small woman with silver hair and sharp blue eyes who'd lived on Maple Street for 30 years. She invited me in for coffee and got straight to the point. "That girl is not okay," she said. "I watch from my kitchen window, and I see things that don't sit right with me." "What kind of things?" "She doesn't go anywhere alone. When she comes outside, which isn't often, one of them is always with her. Last week I saw her trying to check the mail, and Karen came running out like Lily was attempting a jailbreak. Yesterday I saw her sitting by the front window, just staring out at the street, and when Connor's car pulled up, she disappeared from the window immediately." Nora set down her coffee cup and looked at me directly. "Elaine, I've been on this street long enough to recognize when someone's trapped. That sweet girl is trapped. Would you be willing to help her if an opportunity arose?" Nora didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" I explained about protective orders and safety planning, about civil standby and emergency removal. Nora listened carefully and asked intelligent questions. She'd been married to a police officer for 40 years before he died. She understood legal processes and emergency responses. "If Lily needs to get out of there safely," Nora said, "I'm here, day or night." With Nora as my ally, I felt ready to move to the next phase, direct contact with Lily. But first, I needed legal advice. I made an appointment with a family law attorney recommended by the domestic violence advocate. The lawyer, Patricia Hendricks, had 20 years of experience with protective orders and domestic violence cases. "Tell me what you've observed," she said. I laid out everything: the missed medical appointments, the controlled communication, the isolation, the financial concerns I was beginning to uncover. Patricia took notes and asked probing questions. "Do you have any direct evidence of physical abuse?" "Not yet. But I'm worried about emotional and psychological abuse, coercive control. That's harder to prove in court, but not impossible. The key is documentation and witness testimony. You've been documenting, which is good. Do you have any witnesses to specific incidents?" I told her about Nora's observations. Patricia nodded. "If your daughter is willing to cooperate, we can file for a temporary protective order based on coercive control and endangerment. But she has to be the one to file it, and she has to be willing to testify about what's been happening to her." "How do I find out if she's willing if I can't talk to her alone?" That's the challenge. We need to create an opportunity for communication that doesn't put her in more danger. I left Patricia's office with a plan forming in my mind, but I needed one more piece: direct evidence of financial control. With Lily's written permission, obtained during a brief phone call when Connor stepped out of the room, I pulled her credit report. What I found made me sick. 3 credit cards had been opened in her name in November. Cards she'd never mentioned, never applied for. The billing addresses were all the Whitaker house. Someone had been using her identity to run up debt. From Lily's HR portal and pay stubs, we saw her direct deposit had been rerouted to a joint account with Connor that she hadn't authorized. Now I had evidence of financial abuse to go with everything else. I called Patricia immediately. "We have enough for a protective order," she said. "But we still need to talk to your daughter alone." That's when I hatched the plan that would bring everything to a head. I called the Whitaker house on December 20th, a Thursday afternoon when I knew Connor would be at work, but before Richard typically came home from his office. "Karen, it's Elaine. I'd like to take Lily Christmas shopping. Just a few hours, mother and daughter time before the holiday." "I don't think that's a good idea," Karen said. "She's been having some complications, and the doctor wants her to rest." "What kind of complications? Is she okay?" "Nothing serious, just some blood pressure issues. She shouldn't be walking around shopping centers." But I'd spoken to Dr. Martinez just that morning. Lily hadn't been in to see any doctor in over a month. If she was having blood pressure issues, they weren't being monitored by a medical professional. Maybe just a quiet lunch then, somewhere close by. "Elaine, I think it's best if you just let us take care of her right now. She's in good hands." I hung up knowing I wasn't going to get access to Lily through normal channels. They weren't going to let me see her alone, and they sure weren't going to let her leave the house with me. But I had one advantage. Christmas was coming, and even controlling people like to maintain appearances during holidays. I made one more call to Nora. "I need to create a situation where Lily can call for help without them knowing she's calling for help. Are you available on Christmas Eve?" "What do you need me to do?" I explained my plan. It was risky. It relied on timing and luck, but it might be the only chance we'd get. On December 24th, I drove to Patricia Hendricks' office with a manila folder full of documentation, credit reports, medical records, payroll records, and, after she left, bank statements showing the unauthorized account, Janet Mills' surveillance report, Nora's witness statement, and a detailed journal of every incident I'd observed or suspected. Patricia reviewed everything and prepared a protective order petition. "If your daughter is willing to sign this affidavit," Patricia said, "I can get it in front of an on-call judge within hours. Christmas Eve or not, domestic violence doesn't take holidays." "What happens after it's signed?" "The police serve it immediately. They'll do a welfare check, and if your daughter wants to leave, they'll provide a civil standby to ensure she can gather her things safely. The order prohibits Connor from threatening, harassing, or contacting her, and it gives her immediate legal protection. I drove home with the unsigned affidavit in my purse, waiting for the call I hoped would come. At 3 p.m., my phone rang. Nora's name on the caller ID. "Elaine," she said, and I could hear the urgency in her voice. "Something's happening over there. I just saw Lily on the front porch in just a sweater, and it's 38 degrees outside. She's not wearing a coat, and she looks like she's shivering." "I'm on my way," I said. "Call 911 and request a welfare check for a pregnant woman. Tell them she appears to be in distress and underdressed for the weather." "Should I go over there?" "Not yet. Let's see what happens when the police arrive." But as I grabbed my coat and keys, my phone rang again. This time it was Nora calling from a different number. "Elaine, it's me, but I'm calling from inside their house. Richard let me in when I said I dropped off a casserole and wanted to check on her. She gave me her phone. She managed to hide it from them somehow, and she wants to talk to you." My heart pounded. "Put her on." "Mom?" Lily's voice was barely a whisper, but it was her. "Honey, I'm here. Are you okay?"
I'm scared.
"They won't let me leave. Connor took my car keys weeks ago. Karen monitors my phone calls. They changed my bank account password. I tried to leave yesterday, and Richard physically blocked the door. Do you want help getting out of there?" "Yes, but I don't know how. They watch me constantly." "I have a plan, but you have to trust me. Can you get to the front porch and stay there for a few minutes?" "I think so. Karen's in the kitchen, and Richard's watching football."
Go now.
"I'm 5 minutes away, and help is coming." I hung up and called Patricia. "We're moving. My daughter wants out, and she's in immediate danger. Bring her to my office. I'll meet you there with the affidavit." I drove faster than I should have, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I turned onto Maple Street, I could see Lily on the Whitakers' front porch, wrapped in that thin sweater, her arms hugged around her belly. Behind the front window, I could see the warm glow of their firelight, Karen's silhouette moving around, Richard's bulk settled in front of the television. I parked and ran to my daughter. She was shivering, her lips showing blue at the edges, her socks soaked through from standing on the cold concrete. "Mom," she said, and fell into my arms. I wrapped my coat around her, feeling how thin she'd gotten, how her hands trembled against my back. "We're getting you out of here," I said.
Right now.
"Don't make it worse," she whispered. "We're not making it worse. We're ending it." The police arrived as I was helping Lily into my car. 2 patrol cars, and behind them, an ambulance. Nora had mentioned that Lily was pregnant and appeared to be in distress. Officer Ben Carter approached us first. "Ma'am, we got a call about a welfare check." "This is my daughter," I said. "She's been living here temporarily, and I believe she's being held against her will." By this time, Connor had come outside, followed by Karen and Richard. Connor's face was flushed with anger. "There's nothing wrong here," he said to the officer. "This is a family matter." Officer Carter looked at Lily, still wrapped in my coat, still shivering. "Miss, are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" Lily nodded. "I've been trying to leave, but they won't let me. They took my car keys, they control my phone, they won't let me go to my doctor appointments." "That's ridiculous," Karen interjected. "We're helping her. She's pregnant and needs supervision." "Ma'am," Officer Carter said to Karen, "I need to speak with her alone." He walked Lily a few steps away from the group. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I watched Lily nod repeatedly, point back at the house, wipe tears from her face. When the officer returned, his expression had hardened. "Sir," he said to Connor, "your wife is alleging that you've been restricting her movement and controlling her communication. Is that accurate?" "She's confused," Connor said. "Pregnancy hormones. She's not thinking clearly." That's when I pulled the envelope from my purse. Officer, I have a protective order petition here. My daughter is ready to file it. Connor's face went white. You can't do this. She's my wife. The law doesn't care who she's married to, Officer Carter said. If she wants to file for protection, she has that right. We went inside while the paramedic checked Lily's vitals and the second officer took statements. At the courthouse, Lily reviewed and signed the affidavit before the clerk at 4:17 p.m. Judge Patricia Williams issued the temporary protective order. This order is effective immediately, Judge Williams told us. It prohibits the respondent from threatening, harassing, stalking, or making contact with the petitioner. It also authorizes a civil standby for the removal of her personal belongings. We drove back to the Whitaker house in a small convoy. My car with Lily, Patricia's car with legal documents, and 2 police cars to ensure everything stayed peaceful. Officers served the order and conducted a civil standby while Lily gathered her essentials. The scene that followed was surreal. Connor paced the living room like a caged animal, alternating between fury and disbelief. This is illegal, he kept saying. You can't just take my wife. It's inconvenient, I told him. That's not the same thing. Karen tried a different approach. Emotional manipulation. You can't do this on Christmas Eve, Elaine. It's cruel. The calendar doesn't change the law, Officer Carter replied evenly. And domestic violence doesn't take holidays. Richard mostly sat in his chair, muttering about respect and how things used to be done. But when Lily started packing her things, he stood up and blocked her path to the stairs. You're not taking anything from this house that we paid for, he said. Officer Carter stepped between them. Sir, the order specifically allows her to remove her personal belongings. Please step aside. I helped Lily pack 1 suitcase with essentials, maternity clothes, prenatal vitamins, her jewelry, important documents, photos from before her marriage. Everything else, furniture they'd bought together, wedding gifts, shared household items, we left behind. Material things can be replaced. Freedom can't. The screaming started as we loaded her suitcase into my car. Not from fear or pain, but from entitlement losing its voice. You're destroying our marriage, Connor shouted at me. The marriage belongs to you, I said calmly. Lily belongs to herself. Tonight, she also belongs to safety. After we left, I drove Lily straight to the hospital for evaluation. We spent 2 hours in the emergency room while doctors confirmed that she was mildly hypothermic but stable, that the baby was fine, that there were no signs of physical abuse but clear indicators of severe stress. Finally, at midnight on Christmas Day, I brought my daughter home to my house. I heated soup she was too exhausted to finish, gave her clean pajamas that didn't smell like the Whitaker's house, and tucked her under quilts that smelled like lavender and safety. She slept for 14 hours straight, the deep sleep of someone who finally believes the darkness won't win. Christmas morning was quiet. We didn't exchange gifts or make elaborate breakfast. We sat in my kitchen drinking tea while Lily told me everything. How Connor had gradually taken control of her finances, her communication, her movements. How Karen had made her feel like a burden, constantly criticizing her food choices, her energy level, her need for warmth. How Richard had made it clear that challenging their rules was not acceptable in his house. I felt like I was losing myself, she said. Like I was disappearing a little more each day. You were, I told her. So we found you. Over the following days, we met with lawyers and made plans. Lily filed for legal separation and began the process of reclaiming her financial independence. Connor tried calling, texting, showing up at my house, but the protective order held. Every violation was documented. Every attempt at contact was reported to the police. We also had to deal with practical matters. Lily's apartment was still uninhabitable, but the contractor finally confirmed that repairs would be finished by January 5th, and the city would conduct final inspection by January 15th. While we waited, Lily slowly returned to herself. She called her old doctor and resumed proper prenatal care. She contacted friends she'd lost touch with during the months at the Whitakers. She started making plans for single motherhood, looking into daycare options and parenting classes. But the most important change was in her eyes. The wariness faded. The constant vigilance relaxed. She started laughing again, real laughter instead of the careful, measured responses she'd learned to give the Whitakers. On January 15th, we got the call that the apartment had passed final inspection. The city had signed off, the unit was habitable again, and Lily could move back in. We spent that weekend painting. The nursery had been completely rebuilt, new drywall and fresh subflooring and updated electrical. Lily chose a soft blue-gray for the walls, a color that looked peaceful and hopeful instead of institutional. As she rolled paint onto the new walls, she said, "I want to raise this baby to be strong, to recognize the difference between help and control." "You will," I said, "and I'll be there to help you do it." The baby came in early April, a little girl with Lily's dark hair and her father's chin, but with lungs that announced her arrival to the entire maternity ward. We named her Grace, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she filled Lily's apartment with a kind of joy I hadn't seen there before. Connor tried to visit the hospital. The protective order was still in effect, but he hired a lawyer who argued that he had parental rights regardless of the restraining order against him. The judge scheduled a hearing for the following week, but until then, hospital security kept him away from Lily and Grace. I stayed in the hospital room for 3 days, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside Lily's bed, holding Grace while Lily recovered from a difficult labor. During those long hours, Lily told me things she'd never shared before, details about her months with the Whitakers that made my chest tight with rage and grief. "They made me feel like I was crazy," she said while nursing Grace for the first time. "When I complained about being cold, Karen would say I was being dramatic. When I asked for my car keys, Richard would lecture me about responsibility and preparation. When I tried to call you from my own phone, Connor would take it away and say I was being secretive." I smoothed her hair back from her face. "That's called gaslighting. They were trying to make you doubt your own perceptions." It worked. By December, I started believing them. I thought maybe I was being ungrateful. Maybe I was asking for too much. She looked down at Grace, who had fallen asleep in her arms. But when I was sitting on that porch, freezing, and I could hear them laughing inside, something clicked. I realized they didn't care if I was cold or scared or uncomfortable. They cared about control. The court hearing was scheduled for the Tuesday after Grace was born. Patricia Hendricks presented our case methodically: financial abuse, isolation, coercive control, and endangerment of a pregnant woman. Connor's lawyer argued that it was all a misunderstanding, that his client's family had been trying to help during a difficult time. But we had documentation. Bank records showing the unauthorized accounts. Phone records showing that Lily's calls had been monitored and restricted. Medical records showing missed appointments. Janet Mills' surveillance report showing constant supervision. Nora Price's testimony about what she'd witnessed from across the street. The judge extended the protective order for 1 year and established a supervised visitation schedule for Connor to see Grace. He would be allowed 2 hours per week at a family services center with a social worker present. All communication about the baby would go through our lawyers. Connor's face, when the judge read the decision, was something I'll never forget. It wasn't sadness or regret or even anger. It was bewilderment, as if he genuinely couldn't understand how his victim had escaped his control. As we left the courthouse, Patricia pulled me aside. "Your daughter is lucky to have you," she said. "Most women in her situation don't have someone willing to fight this hard. Most mothers would do the same thing. You'd be surprised." Coercive control is insidious. It convinces victims that they deserve it, and it convinces families that they should mind their own business. You refuse to mind your own business. That afternoon, Lily and Grace came home to the apartment that had been uninhabitable 6 months earlier. The space felt different now, not just because it had been rebuilt, but because Lily was different. She moved through her own home like she owned it again, instead of like she was borrowing space. I stayed for a week, helping with late-night feedings and grocery shopping and all the mundane tasks that feel overwhelming when you're healing from childbirth and adjusting to motherhood. But mostly, I watched Lily rediscover her own voice. She called her old friends and invited them to meet Grace. She contacted her supervisor at the dental practice and arranged to return to work part-time when Grace was 3 months old. She opened her own checking account at a different bank and changed all her passwords. Small acts of independence that would seem unremarkable to most people, but felt like victories after what she'd been through. The first supervised visit with Connor was scheduled for Grace's 6-week birthday. Lily was nervous, not because she was afraid of him physically. The Family Services Center was secure, but because she was afraid he would try to manipulate her emotionally. What if he seems different? She asked me the night before. What if he apologizes and promises to change? Then you'll listen politely and stick to the plan? I said. People who engage in coercive control are often very good at apologies when they've lost control. But apologies aren't the same as accountability, and promises aren't the same as changed behavior. The visit lasted exactly 2 hours. Connor held Grace, took photos, and tried to engage Lily in conversation about working things out. The social worker's notes, which we received a copy of, described him as polite but persistent in attempting to discuss reconciliation despite being advised that the visit was solely for parent-child contact. After that first visit, Connor's behavior escalated in predictable ways. He started calling the apartment complex, claiming to be Lily's husband, and asking for information about her lease. He contacted her workplace, saying he needed to discuss family matters with her. He hired a private investigator to follow her. We only found out because the investigator was ethical enough to stop when he realized he was being asked to stalk a woman with a protective order. Each violation was documented and reported. Each report strengthened our case for extending the protective order. Connor's lawyer eventually advised him that his behavior was hurting his chances of expanded visitation, and the harassment stopped. Meanwhile, Lily was building a new life. She found a good daycare run by a woman named Maria who had 3 children of her own and understood the challenges of single motherhood. She joined a new mothers group at the community center. She started taking evening classes toward a dental hygiene degree, planning for a future where she could support herself and Grace independently. But the most important change was in how she talked about herself. The self-doubt and self-blame that had characterized her speech during her months with the Whitakers gave way to clarity and confidence. "I'm a good mother," she said one evening while Grace slept in her arms. "I make good decisions. I can trust my own judgment." "Yes, you can," I agreed. I was so afraid for so long that I was being dramatic or unreasonable. But I wasn't, was I? "No, honey. You weren't. You were being human in an inhumane situation." The 1-year anniversary of our Christmas Eve rescue fell on a Sunday. Lily suggested we visit Nora Price, who had become something of a surrogate grandmother to Grace and a trusted friend to both of us. Nora's house still faced the Whitakers' colonial, but the Whitakers had moved away in the spring. The house sold quickly to a young family with small children, the kind of family that brings joy and noise and life to a neighborhood. "I still think about that night sometimes," Nora said while bouncing Grace on her knee. "How scared you looked when you called Elaine. How brave Lily was to stay on that porch until help came." "I think about it too," Lily said, "but not in a sad way anymore. I think about it as the night I got my life back." We talked about the signs we'd all missed or minimized in the beginning. How Connor's romantic gestures had actually been forms of control. The flowers delivered to her workplace that announced their relationship to her colleagues. The weekend getaways that isolated her from her friends. the engagement ring that was chosen without her input, but that she felt she had to love. The hardest part, Lily said, was realizing that I kept thinking that if he really loved me, he wouldn't try to control me. But control was how he expressed love. To him, they were the same thing. Nora nodded. I was married for 40 years to a good man, but I saw plenty of bad marriages in this neighborhood. The worst ones always started with someone who couldn't tell the difference between loving someone and owning someone. As Grace grew from infant to toddler, she became the center of both of our worlds. She was curious and fearless, quick to laugh and slow to give up when something frustrated her. She had Lily's determination and what I hoped was my practical nature. Connor continued his supervised visits, though they became less frequent as Grace got older and more mobile. A toddler is harder to impress than an infant, and Grace seemed to sense that the man who saw her for 2 hours every other week was essentially a stranger. She was polite, but not particularly interested in him, which clearly frustrated Connor more than any legal ruling could have. When Grace turned 2, Connor petitioned for unsupervised visitation. His lawyer argued that he had completed anger management classes and parenting classes, that he had stable employment and housing, and that Grace deserved a relationship with her father. Patricia Hendricks countered with evidence of his continued attempts to control and monitor Lily, his violations of the protective order, and expert testimony about the impact of coercive control on children, even when they're too young to understand what they're witnessing. The judge ruled that supervised visitation would continue until Grace was old enough to express her own preferences and until Connor demonstrated sustained respectful behavior toward Lily for at least 2 years. The court recognizes that fathers have rights, the judge said, but children have the right to safety above all else. This child will not be used as a tool for continued harassment of her mother. Connor's face during that hearing was different from the bewilderment I'd seen 2 years earlier. Now there was resignation, and maybe the beginning of understanding that his actions had consequences that couldn't be charmed or argued away. Lily finished her dental hygiene program when Grace was 3. She graduated with honors and was immediately offered a full-time position at a practice across town from where she'd worked before, a fresh start in a place where Connor couldn't casually stop by or create uncomfortable encounters. On graduation day, I watched my daughter walk across the stage to accept her degree, and I felt a pride that went beyond typical parental satisfaction. This was a woman who had been systematically stripped of her independence and had fought her way back to self-sufficiency. This was a mother who was modeling strength and resilience for her daughter. This was my child, who had survived something that breaks many people. Grace started preschool that fall at a program attached to Lily's workplace. She was bright and social, easily making friends and adapting to new situations. Her teachers described her as confident and empathetic, quick to help classmates who were struggling and unafraid to ask for help when she needed it. She's secure, Lily's pediatrician told us during a routine checkup. Children who feel safe at home tend to be confident explorers in the world. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. What we were doing was maintaining the routines and boundaries that had kept us safe and stable for 3 years. Lily and Grace lived in the apartment that had been rebuilt from flood damage, the apartment where Lily had first learned to trust her own judgment again. I lived 10 minutes away, close enough for daily involvement, but far enough to respect their independence. We had Sunday dinners together every week. We celebrated birthdays and holidays without drama or walking on eggshells. Grace spent Friday nights at my house, giving Lily time for adult friendships and activities that had nothing to do with being a mother. It was, in many ways, an ordinary life, which was exactly what we'd fought to achieve. The final resolution came when Grace was 4 years old. Connor had remarried, a woman named Jennifer who seemed kind but naive, the same way Lily had been naive when she'd first met Connor. Jennifer was pregnant, expecting Connor's second child. Connor petitioned the court one more time for expanded visitation, arguing that Grace deserved to know her half-sibling and that his marriage to Jennifer proved he was capable of healthy relationships. This time, the petition was different. Connor had completed not just court-mandated classes, but voluntary therapy. His violations of the protective order had stopped completely 2 years earlier. His behavior during supervised visits had been appropriate and focused on Grace rather than on trying to communicate with or manipulate Lily. Patricia presented evidence of Connor's changed behavior while also arguing for continued caution. Coercive control often involves cycles, she told the judge. Periods of good behavior followed by escalation. My client is willing to consider gradually expanded visitation, but with safeguards. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation of Connor and a home study of his new living situation. Both came back positive. Connor's therapist testified that he had genuinely worked to understand and change his controlling behaviors, though she cautioned that such changes required ongoing vigilance and support. Lily surprised everyone, including me, by agreeing to a trial period of expanded visitation. Grace is getting old enough to have opinions about this, she told me after the hearing. And she's secure enough in our life that I don't think a few extra hours with Connor will destabilize her. If he's really changed, then Grace deserves to have a relationship with her father. If he hasn't changed, we'll know quickly, and we have legal protections in place. The expanded visitation started slowly, 4 hours every other Saturday, supervised by Jennifer rather than a social worker, with specific pickup and drop-off locations that didn't require Connor to come to Lily's apartment or workplace. Grace was excited about the change, mainly because Jennifer had a big dog that Grace adored, and because the visits included trips to parks and children's museums that she enjoyed. She came home from these visits happy and tired, full of stories about activities and games. More importantly, she came home without anxiety or confusion. There were no behavior changes, no regression in sleep or toilet training, no signs of stress that might indicate inappropriate conversations or pressure from Connor. After 6 months of successful expanded visits, the judge modified the custody arrangement to allow Connor alternating weekend custody, still with Jennifer present and with continued restrictions on his communication with Lily. This is progress, Patricia told us, but it's not vindication. Your boundaries and protections remain in place for good reason. People can change their behavior without changing their fundamental nature. I agreed with Patricia's caution, but I was also proud of Lily's willingness to consider what was best for Grace even when it meant interacting with a system that had once been used to harm her. I'm not doing this for Connor, Lily explained. I'm doing it for Grace. She's strong enough now to handle having him in her life in a limited way. And if that changes, if he starts using her to get to me, or if the visits start affecting her negatively, we'll adjust accordingly. By the time Grace started kindergarten, our family had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Lily was established in her career and had started dating a man named David who worked as a teacher at Grace's school. Their relationship was slow and careful, built on friendship and respect rather than dramatic gestures and overwhelming intensity. Grace spent alternate weekends with Connor and Jennifer, who had welcomed their son the previous spring. Grace seemed to enjoy being a big sister during these visits, and Connor appeared genuinely focused on building a relationship with his daughter rather than using her as a conduit to Lily. But the most important measure of our success was Lily herself. She had rebuilt not just her life, but her sense of self. She made decisions confidently, trusted her own judgment, maintained friendships and hobbies and goals that had nothing to do with pleasing or placating anyone else. Sometimes I wonder who I would have become if I'd never met Connor, she said one evening while we watched Grace play in my backyard. You became who you were always meant to be, I told her. You just took a detour for a while. A dangerous detour. But not a permanent one. That's what matters. As I watched Grace chase fireflies in the growing dusk, I thought about the lessons she was learning without knowing she was learning them. She was growing up in a household where women made their own decisions, She was seeing her mother navigate challenges with intelligence and courage. She was learning that love meant respect and support, not control and possession. Most importantly, she was learning that when something feels wrong, it probably is wrong, and that speaking up about it is not only acceptable but necessary. The protective order expired when Grace was 5, and we chose not to renew it. Connor had demonstrated sustained appropriate behavior, and the legal framework for custody and communication was working effectively. But I kept a copy of that original order in my desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what we'd survived and overcome. Because stories like this repeat until someone refuses the encore. And sometimes refusing the encore means being willing to fight for someone who's forgotten how to fight for herself. Sometimes it means being the mother who won't unclench her stomach until her child is safe. Sometimes it means being the neighbor who calls 911 when she sees something wrong. Sometimes it means being the advocate who believes survivors when they finally find their voice. Here's what this winter taught me, what I hope it teaches anyone who needs to hear it. Temporary arrangements can become permanent traps if you're not careful. When someone insists on helping just for a while, pay attention to who controls the timeline, the resources, and the rules. Isolation masquerades as protection. When someone starts limiting your contact with friends, family, or professional support, they're not protecting you, they're controlling you. Financial abuse is real and devastating. Control of money is control of options. Keep your own accounts, your own credit, your own legal documents, even in marriage. Documentation is your friend. Write things down. Keep records. Save messages. Boring paperwork can become crucial evidence when patterns of abuse need to be proven. Trust your instincts, especially when others tell you your instincts are wrong. If something feels off, it probably is off, even if you can't articulate exactly why. There's a difference between helping someone and controlling them. Real help increases someone's options and independence. Control disguised as help reduces options and creates dependence. Pregnant women are particularly vulnerable to escalating abuse. The isolation and physical vulnerability of pregnancy can be exploited by partners who want to increase their control. Communities matter. Neighbors, friends, family members, and professional allies can provide crucial support and intervention when someone is being isolated and controlled. Legal protections exist, but they require someone to access them. Protective orders, custody arrangements, and financial safeguards can be powerful tools, but only if victims know about them and feel safe using them. Children are resilient, but they need stable, safe environments to thrive. Sometimes protecting children means disrupting family structures that look normal from the outside, but are harmful from the inside. Recovery is possible, but it takes time. Healing from coercive control involves rebuilding not just practical independence, but psychological confidence. Be patient with survivors who need time to trust their own judgment again. Most importantly, when someone you love is in danger, don't wait for permission to help them. Trust your instincts, gather your resources, and act. The person being controlled may not be able to ask for help directly, but they're hoping someone will notice and care enough to intervene. Grace is 7 now, smart and funny and completely secure in the knowledge that she's loved and valued. She visits her father regularly and has a good relationship with him within the boundaries we've established. She doesn't remember the Christmas Eve when we rescued her mother from a cold porch and a controlling family, but she's growing up in the warmth and safety we fought to create that night. Lily is thriving. She's now clinical lead and equity partner at a dentist-owned practice, working alongside a collaborating dentist and another hygienist who became a close friend. She married David last summer in a ceremony where Grace served as flower girl, and I walked Lily down the aisle. It was a celebration of love that felt nothing like the wedding she'd had with Connor. This one was joyful and relaxed, focused on commitment and partnership rather than possession and control. And I'm proud, not just of surviving a crisis, but of refusing to look the other way when something felt wrong, of trusting my instincts when my daughter's safety was at stake, of learning that sometimes love means fighting, and sometimes fighting means being willing to be seen as the difficult mother, the interfering in-law, the woman who doesn't mind her own business. Because my daughter's safety was my business, and her freedom was worth fighting for. The winter we found Lily taught me that power doesn't just sit in rooms where men raise their voices and women apologize. Power sits on paper, in court orders and custody agreements and bank account signatures. Power sits in communities willing to notice when someone needs help. Power sits in the decision to act when action is needed, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. Most of all, power sits in the simple recognition that everyone deserves to be warm, safe, and free to make their own choices. That's not too much to ask. That's not dramatic or unreasonable or ungrateful. That's just human. And on the coldest night of that winter, when my daughter was shivering on a porch while laughter spilled through someone else's windows, we chose warmth over appearances, safety over politeness, action over patience. We chose to bring her home. And every day since then, I wake up grateful that we made that choice. Because Grace will never know a world where she has to ask permission to be warm. And Lily will never again mistake control for care. That's how we keep each other safe. That's how we keep each other warm.